Thank you, Ann. Thank you, Karen, for making this beautiful store. I've been trying to get here for like 30 years, since I was 2. You know, thank you all so much for being here. You know, one thing that I realized in this tour is that when you know, you get to come out and read, and especially in the signing line afterwards, you get to know your readers. The great blessing of that is it makes you more courageous the next time when you try to make a leap. So when I was writing this Lincoln book, and I think, wow, this is a little different, you know, I actually would think of the readers I'd met and think, well, they can take it, you know, they're good. So thank you so much. So really, this is my first novel, and but in a way, it's not. Many years ago, when my wife and I were first married, we were quite broke, and I was feeling a little inadequate, you know, not a good provider. So I happened to go down to a friend's wedding in Mexico, and it was just like a writer's dream. There was a radical Catholic priest. There was a male male model slash surfer. There was a guy who just gotten out of prison for DMV things. I was like, you know. So I went home and I said to my wife, honey, I actually said this, honey, you're sitting on a gold mine. Just let me do this. So I was working full time as a tech writer, and but every night I'd have 1 or sometimes 2 pots of coffee and a bottle of Boone's Farm, which is like the magic elixir. And then I wrote this book. And after a year, I had a 700-page manuscript. And just to let you know how good it was called La Boda de Eduardo, which I think means like Ed's wedding or something like that. So, you know, like all writers, I said, well, honey, you know, I'm pretty happy with this. So if you want to take a look, just whenever, you know, like now. So she takes it into this room, and I'm kind of hovering in the doorway, and I look in, and I swear she must have been on about page 6. And I look in, and she's sitting like this. So she sort of knew what that had cost our family, you know. And so I shied away from novels all those years. Then about the same time, though, a couple months later, we were in D.C., and we drove by Oak Hill Cemetery, and up on a hillside there was this line of crypts. And my wife's cousin, who was with us, said, do you know that Willie Lincoln was buried in that one on the end there? I'm like, I didn't know. And she said, also, the newspapers at the time reported that Lincoln had actually gone into the crypt on several occasions to hold the body or somehow interact with the body. So that was like mind-blowingly beautiful. And I thought, yeah. But I had a great teacher named Doug Unger who once told us if a young writer could learn the difference between the story she writes and the story she thinks about writing, she could save herself about 15 years, you know? So at that time I was like, I had one book out and it was kind of funny, kind of sci-fi, and I thought, I can't do that. That's too much for me, you know, so I put it off. But over the years, whenever I would feel artistically happy, that little Lincoln book would go, how about it, you know? And I'd go, no, get thee behind me, Abe, you know? And then finally, in 2012, I had finished 10th of December. It was about to come out, and I'm like, you know, dude, you're 53 years old. You've wanted to do this all these years. Why can't you do it? And my answer to myself was, well, it's too straight. It's too emotional. It's got too much grief, too much love. I'm like, what? You know, that seems like bad reasons. Like, you didn't want to be the guy who was gravestone says, you know, declined to do thing he always wanted to do. So I gave myself kind of a 3-month, like a contract to just try it and say, well, if it's no good, then basically you just didn't write for 3 months. You've done that before, so it's okay. So I started it, and it actually really kind of caught fire, and I finished it. So here we are. But if you're a writer, you know that sometimes, in the best case, your material kind of dictates your form. You get to a certain point, there's a big friggin' problem, and your first move is to go, I suck. I should go to law school. What's wrong with me? I knew I was no good. But then the second move is to say, okay, if this is this hard, there must be something hidden. Like Einstein said one time, no worthy problem is solved in the plane of its original conception. So if a story is pushing back at you, it's just saying, I really want to be a bigger story, if you don't mind, you know. So this one pushed back right away because you have Abe Lincoln alone at night in a graveyard. So who's the narrator? It could be Lincoln, but then you're into like, you know, 7 minutes ago, I did enter yon graveyard, and I was very sad indeed, and you know. So anyway, after struggling with that for a while, I thought, well, who's in a graveyard at night? The only other thing, it could be a gravedigger who like is working overtime. I don't know. It doesn't make sense. So then I thought, well, ghost, right? So I put some ghosts in there. So the premise of this book is that in this zone called the Bardo, which in Tibetan tradition is kind of the transitional space between the moment of your death and whatever happens next. These ghosts are all kind of there, and they're kind of unlike us, you know, they're neurotic, and they're tortured by desire, and life isn't working out the way it was supposed to. So the whole book takes place in one night in that graveyard. And so we're going to, this book does not read well with one person, so around the country people have been so generous to offer to read with me, so we're going to have a little reading party up here for you. We're going to start at about chapter 43, which is like 150 pages into the book. So if you help me with this, the book's pretty weird, and it's pretty funny, but this isn't funny. This is a serious scene. So if you'll help me kind of imagine where we are. Lincoln has already been to the crypt, and he just went in there to take a look, and he was so moved that his son still seemed like his son that he actually picks up the body, and he has a moment with him. Then he puts him back, and he's trying to leave and put this behind him, but he can't. He can't somehow get out of the graveyard. So he gets a couple hundred yards away and just sits down in the grass, cross-legged, just so imagine Lincoln sitting in a patch of really tall grass. And then in a couple minutes, these two ghosts who witnessed this event come to join him. And their goal is to try to persuade him to go back to say a proper goodbye to the son. So Willie, meanwhile, is back at the crypt. He's kind of being tended by this old prudish guy called the Reverend. So one of the conventions of this world is that like as if that's not enough, you know. So if a ghost, if you're sitting here in the bookstore and a ghost decides to enter your body and sit in the posture that you're in, they basically have 100% access to your thought stream, so they can read your mind. So in this scene, two ghosts are going to come out. They're going to inhabit Abe Lincoln, and they're going to he's going to speak in that way. Throughout the text, the gentleman refers to Abe Lincoln. All right, so there we go, and thank you and have a good night. We're all done. Okay, so the nice people who have agreed to help me here are, the people who are going to read the historical narratives are Jordan Ravelette. Jordan, want to come on up? Mike Baum and Bridget Berger. Thank you guys so much for doing this. Okay, now one of the ghosts is named Hans Vollman, and as I said, the ghosts are stuck here for certain reasons. They have issues, and in this world, you get a physical manifestation that corresponds to why you're stuck. It just manifests. So Hans was a printer. He was married to he was in his 50s, married to a beautiful young girl in an arranged marriage. And on their wedding night, she just couldn't hide her disgust for this guy. So he's a gentleman, so he just said, okay, well, then we won't consummate the marriage. We'll just live together as friends. And they did that for several months. And then one day, he's so nice that she kind of falls from a little bit. And so they say this is a Wednesday. She kind of lets him know that Wednesday night is the night when it's all going to happen. You know what I'm saying? And so then he goes to work on Wednesday and he gets killed. Wah! So his manifestation is and this is going to be, by the way, Brian Russell. Brian, thank you very much. So Brian, no, I'm not sorry, Brian. Hans is going to be naked. He's naked. And if you could imagine, he has a tremendously large erection, as you would. About the size of a small Labrador Retriever. Thank you, Brian.
No, thank you.
The auditions, oi. Okay, so playing a ghost, Vollman's friend named Roger Bevins will be Brad Oxnam. Brad, come on up. And Bevins is a young guy who disappointed in love, slashed his wrists, and at the very last moment of his life, he felt, as we sometimes do, how gorgeous this world is and how perfectly it's scaled to us, and how beautiful. So he kind of locked up in the last minute, and he just doesn't want to go. He wants to go back to the world and enjoy its beauty. So his manifestation is he's got hundreds of additional, like, eyes and ears and mouths and hands to kind of try to pull the physical world closer, kind of like Shiva. All right, and then, yeah, thank you. And I will be playing Abraham Lincoln because it's my show. And, So Lincoln, he's like these guys, except he's got longings and regrets, but he just hasn't died yet. So I guess we'll try this for you. Thank you very much, and this will be Lincoln and the Bardo. All right. Okay.
We found the gentleman has been described to us near Bellingweather, husband, father, shipwright.
Sitting cross-legged and defeated in a patch of tall grass.
As we approached, he lifted head from hands and heaved a great sigh. He might have been in that moment a sculpture on the theme of loss.
Shall we? Mr. Vollman said. I hesitated. The Reverend would not approve, I said. The Reverend is not here, he said.
Chapter 44.
In order to occupy the greatest percentage of the gentleman's volume, I lowered myself into his lap and sat, cross-legged, just as he was sitting.
The two now comprised one sitting man, Mr. Vollman's greater girth somewhat overflowing the gentleman, his massive member existing wholly outside the gentleman, pointing up to the moon.
It was quite something. Quite something in there. Bevins, come in, I called out. This is not to be missed.
I went in, assuming the same cross-legged posture.
And the three of us were one.
So to speak.
Chapter 45.
There was a touch of the prairie about the fellow,
Yes.
like stepping into a summer barn late at night.
Or a musty plains office where some bright candle still burns.
Vast, windswept, new, sad.
Spacious. Curious. Doom-minded. Ambitious.
Back slightly out.
Right boof chafing. Ow.
The recent entry of the youthful Mr. Bevins now caused the gentleman a mild thought swerve back to a scene from his own wild youth. A soft-spoken but retrograde, with dirty cheeks, kind eyes, lass, leading him shyly down a muddy path, nettles accruing on her swaying green skirt as, in his mind, at the time, a touch of shame rose up, having to do with his sense that this girl was not really fair game, i.e. was more beast than lady, i.e. did not even know how to read.
Becoming aware of that which he was remembering, the man's face reddened. We could feel it reddening. And at that thought that he was in the midst of this tragic circumstance, remembering such a sordid incident.
And he hurriedly directed our mind elsewhere so as to leave this inappropriate thought behind.
46.
Tried to see his boy's face.
Couldn't.
Tried to hear the boy's laugh.
Couldn't.
Attempted to recall some particular incident involving the boy in the hope this might...
First time we fitted him for a suit.
Thus thought the gentleman. This did the trick.
First time we fitted him for a suit, he looked down at the trousers and then up at me, amazed, as if to say, "Father, I am wearing grown-up pants." Shirtless, barefoot, pale round belly like an old man's, then the little cuffed shirt and buttoning it up. "Goodbye, little belly, we're inshirting you now." Inshirting? I do not even believe that is a word, Father. I tied the little tie, spun him around for a look. "We have dressed up a wild savage, looks like," I said. He made the growling face. His hair stuck straight up. His cheeks were red. Racing around that store just previous, he'd knocked over a rack of socks. The tailor, complicit, brought out the little jacket with much pomp. Then the shy, boyish smile as I slid the jacket on him. "Say," he said, "don't I look fine, Father?"
Then no thought at all for a while, and we just looked about us. Bare trees black against the dark blue sky.
Little jacket, little jacket, little jacket.
This phrase sounded in our head. A star flickered off, then on.
Same one he's wearing back in there now. Huh. Same little jacket, but he who was wearing it is... I so want it not to be true. Broken, pale broken thing. Why will it not work? What magic word made it work? Who was the keeper of that word? What did it profit him to switch this one off? What a contraption it is. How did it ever run? What spark ran it? Grand little machine, set up just so. Receiving the spark, it jumped to life. What put out that spark? What a sin it would be. Who would dare ruin such a marvel? Hence is murder anathema. God forbid I should ever commit such a grievous...
Something then troubling us.
We ran one hand roughly over our face, as if attempting to suppress a notion just arising.
This effort not proving successful.
The notion washed over us.
Chapter 47.
Young Willie Lincoln was laid to rest on the day that the casualty lists from the Union victory at Fort Donaldson were publicly posted, an event that caused a great shock among the public at the time, the cost in life being unprecedented thus far in the war.
In Setting the Record Straight, Memoir, Error, and Evasion by Jason Tum, Journal of American History.
The details of the losses were communicated to the president even as young Willie lay under embalmment.
In Lincoln's Lost Angel by Simon Iverness. More than 1,000 troops on both sides were killed, and 3 times that number wounded. It was a most bloody fight, a young Union soldier told his father, so devastating to his company that despite the victory, he remained sad, lonely, and downhearted. Only 7 of the 85 men in his unit survived. In Team of Rivals, The Political Genius of Abraham Lincoln by Doris Kearns Goodwin.
The dead at Donaldson, sweet Jesus, heaped and piled like threshed wheat, 1 on top of 2 on top of 3. I walked through it after with a bad feeling. Lord, it was me done that, I thought.
In These Battle Memories by First Lieutenant Daniel Brower.
The dead lay as they had fallen, in every conceivable shape, some grasping their guns as though they were in the act of firing, while others, with the cartridge in their icy grasp, were in the act of loading. Some of the countenances wore a peaceful, glad smile, while on others rested a fiendish look of hate. It looked as though each countenance was the exact counterpart of the thoughts that were passing through the mind when the death messenger laid them low. Perhaps that noble-looking youth with his smiling, upturned face, with his glossy ringlets matted out with his own lifeblood, felt a mother's prayer stealing over his senses as his young life went out. Near him lay a young husband with a prayer for his wife and little one yet lingering on his lips. Youth and age, virtue and evil were represented on those ghastly countenances. Before us lay the charred and blackened remains of some who had been burnt alive. They were wounded too badly to move, and the fierce elements consumed them.
In the Civil War Years, a day-to-day chronicle of the life of a nation, account of Corporal Lucius W. Barber, 15th Illinois Infantry.
I'd never seen a dead person before. Now I saw my fill. One poor lad had frozen solid in the posture of looking down aghast at his wound, eyes open. Some of his insides had spilled out and made, there on his side under a thin coat of ice, a blur of purple and red. At home on my dressing table was a holy card of the Sacred Heart of Jesus, and this fellow looked like that. Only his bulge of red and purple was lower and larger and off to one side, and him gazing down at it in horror.
From That Terrible Glory, a collection of Civil War letters from the men who fought it, compiled and edited by Brian Bell and Libby Trust.
And Mother Fire had swept through the frozen dead and hurt where they lay. We found one still kicking among them and was able to bring him back, still alive, not even knowing which side he was on. So burned was he and naked except for one leg of his pants. I never did hear how he made out, but it did not look hopeful for that poor devil.
In Letters of an Illinois Soldier, edited by Sam Westfall, account of Private Edward Gates, Company F, 15th Illinois Volunteer Infantry.
2 or 3 of us would grab a fellow and haul him away just as we found him, as it was cold and the bodies were completely froze. That day I learned a person can get used to anything. Soon it all seemed normal to us, and we even joked about it, making up names for each depending on how he looked. There was bent over, and there was shocked. This was half boy.
From Oh to Be Home Again with You, Letters from Fallen Warriors, Daniel Spence, editor.
We found 2 little fellers holding hands, couldn't been more than 14, 15 apiece, as if they had decided to pass through that dark portal together.
Unpublished Civil War correspondence of Andrew Stark, by permission of his family.
How many more did you intend to make, sir, before you was done? One minute there was our little Nate on that bridge with a fish pond. Where's that boy now? And who is it called him hither in that notice he saw down at Orby's? Well, sir, that was your name he saw upon it, Abraham Lincoln.
In Country Letters to President Lincoln, letter from Robert Hansworthy, Boonesboro, Maryland.
Chapter 48. He is just one, and the weight of it about to kill me. Have exported this grief some 3,000 times so far, to date. A mountain of boys, someone's boys, must keep on with it. May not have the heart for it. It's one thing to pull the lever when blind to the result, but here lies one dear example of what I accomplished by the orders I may not have the heart for it. What to do? Call a halt? Toss down the lost hole those 3,000? Sue for peace? Become great course-reversing fool, king of indecision, laughing stock for the ages, waffling hick, slim Mr. Turnabout? It is out of control. Who's doing it? Who caused it? Whose arrival on the scene began it? What am I doing? What am I doing here? Everything nonsense now. Those mourners came up, hands extended, sons intact, wearing on their faces enforced sadness masks to hide any sign of their happiness, which went on. They could not hide how alive they yet were with it, with their happiness at the potential of their still living sons. Until lately, I was one of them, strolling whistling through the slaughterhouse, averting my eyes from the carnage, able to laugh and dream and hope because it had not yet happened to me, to us. Trap, horrible trap. At one's birth it is sprung. Some last day must arrive when you will need to get out of that body. Bad enough. Then we bring a baby here? The terms of the trap are compounded. That baby also must depart. All pleasures should be tainted by that knowledge, but hopeful dear us, we forget. Lord, what is this? All this walking about, trying, smiling, bowing, joking, this sitting down at table, pressing of shirts, tying of ties, shining of shoes, planning of trips, singing of songs in the bath, when he is to be left out here? Is a person to nod, dance, reason, walk, discuss as before? A parade passes. He can't rise and join. Am I to run after it, take my place, lift knees high, wave a flag, blow a horn? Was he dear or not? Then let me be happy no more. Chapter 49.
It was quite cold. Being in the gentleman we were, for the first time in
ever so long.
quite cold ourselves.
He sat, distraught and shivering, seeking about for any consolation.
He must either be in a happy place or some null place now.
Thought the gentleman.
In either case, there's no longer suffering. Suffered so terribly at the end, the racking cough, the trembling, the vomiting, the pathetic attempts to keep the mouth wiped with the shaky hand, the way his panicked eyes would steal up and catch mine as if to say, "Is there really nothing, Papa, you can do?"
And in his mind, the gentleman stood. We stood with him on a lonely plain, screaming at the top of our lungs. Quiet then, and a great weariness.
All over now. He is either in joy or nothingness. So why grieve? The worst of it for him is over. Because I loved him so, and am in the habit of loving him, and that love must take the form of fussing and worry and doing. Only there's nothing left to do. Free myself of this darkness as I can, remain useful, not go mad. Think of him when I do as being in some bright place, free of suffering, resplendent in a new mode of being.
Thus thought the gentleman, thoughtfully combing a patch of grass with his hand.
And Lord, the fellow was low. He was attempting to formulate a goodbye in some sort of positive spirit, and not wishing to enact that final departure in gloom, in case it might be felt somehow by the lad, even as he told himself that the lad was now past all feeling. But all within him was sadness, guilt, and regret, and he could find little else. So he lingered, hoping for some comforting notion to arise upon which he might expand. But nothing came. Low, colder than before, and sadder. And when he directed his mind outward, seeking the comfort of his life out there, and the encouragement of his future prospects, and the high regard in which he was held, no comfort was forthcoming. But on the contrary, he was not, it seemed, well thought of, or succeeding in much of anything at all.
Thank you. That was wonderful. Really. Thank you so much. Yeah, that was really true. That's why you get professional actors. Yeah. Thank you so much. The rest of the book is a laugh riot. I promise. That's not. So I think if you're up to it, we can have some questions. And I've been doing this touring, and I found this really interesting thing that the first question always comes from the person with the most sexual energy in the room. It's like this Darwinian thing. So Oh, Nashville. It is Music City, I guess. It's her. The minute he walked in, I knew it. I knew the.
Anyway, we were talking when Lincoln was thinking about as soon as you're born, you're trapped. I just wonder, were you conscious at all, or I think it was Hemingway's. What about? He's an ambulance driver. And he was talking about the biological trap. Nobody could escape it. Were you at all semi-conscious of that, or it just happened?
My process is it just happens. And I found when I was younger, I had this medical affliction called the Hemingway boner, actually, where everything, all I wanted to do was be Hemingway, So I was living in Amarillo, and it was like, Nick walked into the Walmart. It was pleasant, But actually, I had a breakthrough moment when I was working at a tech writing place, and I realized that because I wasn't trained in English or literature, and I have a little bit of a literal mind, that for me to write stuff that has any energy, I have to kind of really try not to plan out at all. So I have the Einstein thing I said earlier, and there's two others that I kind of kind of mantras. One is just this great Bartholomew essay called On Not Knowing, and he says something like the writer is that person who, embarking on her task, has no idea of how to proceed. And then there's Gerald Stern, and are there kids here? There are kids. I know there are kids here. Either that or there were adults making childlike sounds for no reason. So, but I'll clean it up. But Gerald Stern says something like, if you start out to write a poem about two dogs making love, and then you write a poem about two dogs making love, then you wrote a poem about two dogs making love. You know. So the idea is that you try to trick yourself. So with all this stuff, I think it's true that those, you know, I hope that there are resonances and stuff. But at the time, I'm just trying to make the language lively. I often would just imagine that there's a meter in my head, and over here is P for positive, and this is N for negative. And as you're reading, it's almost meditative. You're just trying to see what the prose is doing to the needle. And when it goes in, if it's in the positive, you're good. When it drops, or drips, I guess, your job is to kind of just allow it. Like instead of saying, I failed, you turn to the story and say, oh, I noticed your needle dropped. You know, what can I do for you? And usually the story will say, I'm fine, I'm good, you know. Or it'll say, come on, I'm about patriarchy, it's cool, you know, it's all right. But then if you bear down on it, it'll say, you know, what's wrong with the story? And it'll kind of go, well, I'm boring, you know. And then you go, you know, you are, you know. So that's kind of the method, really. So yeah, it's as soon as I try to take control of it, it's kind of like going on a date with index cards, you know, like 7:30, ask about her mom, you know. And so the reason you would do that in the date or the story is that it's an insecure position to not be sure. So to have some dogma or a plan is really helpful, but as in the date, it communicates a kind of condescension rather than the intimate relation that we're trying to conjure up. So, yeah. Yes, ma'am.
When did you know you were done with research?
Research? I had done some in the 20 years since, just casually, and then I kind of had a sort of a hobbyist. Like I'd write for 4 hours. When I started to get a little bit, you know, like blurry, then I just read a bunch. I had like 300 Lincoln books in my room, and I would kind of just casually read. With this one, I kind of knew the 6 or 7 things I wanted to focus on. So if I went into a bookstore, I'd take all the Lincoln books down and kind of just look at those sections. But again, the thing I realized pretty early was, you know, not having written a novel, I thought the fun would be that all you had to do was kind of research and have a verisimilitude or something. And then you get to that critical point where you realize that's not really what a novel is, you know. So my model is that a work of fiction is kind of like this black box that you walk into, the reader walks into, and something's supposed to happen to her, but you don't really know what. But it's supposed to be intense, and it should be irreducible, and maybe you don't even know what it is as the writer. It shouldn't be trivial. It should be actually a moment. We've all had it. You know, you come out of a book and you're just kind of dazed. That's the moment. Now then we say, oh, why was I dazed? And we deconstruct it. But I think that's really what you're trying to do. So at many points in this book, there were things where I thought, oh, it'll be so cool. I'll make a complete map of Oak Hill Cemetery. And at some point, you know, no, that's a buzzkill. Because then you have to be accurate to it. Or I thought I'll set it in the Bardo and I'll become a master of the Tibetan Book of the Dead. Another buzzkill, because then you have to be faithful to that. And at one point, we have these historical narratives, and at one point they were all true. And then there was a moment where I saw, ooh, if I made one up here that said this, it would produce more of a pop at the end of the chapter. So I started putting in made-up historical things with attributions that are supposed to trick you into thinking. It's like alt facts, kind of, like, you know. Yeah. But the thing is, with that, you know, you're entering into a contract with your reader, like, all right, you're going to let me lie small to tell truth big. You know, unlike, you know, you say to Kellyanne Conway, there's a duck on your head, and she says, no, there isn't, and what do you have against animals? You know, yeah. That's called the Kellyanne swerve. It's kind of a new dancer. Yeah. Yes, sir.
Having written so many short stories and written in that way, and focusing on like compression, did you find that you had to like work against that urge in this story, or did it carry itself through a full novel?
No, I honestly, my mantra was don't be a novel, because I've fallen into that trap before with that Mexico novel. Or for me, what happens, I go, oh, it's a novel. I'll do a chapter on the guy's shoes, you know, and next thing you know, so I really tried to say, if you want to be a story, I would love it. If you want to be a very short novella, I would love it. And actually the book's, it's only 60,000 words, and there's a lot of format help to get up to, you know, so I was kind of trying to, yeah. I'm working on a new thing in an 80 point font. Yeah. But really, for me, I found a long time ago that it's the model for fiction for me. It's like a wind-up toy, wind it up, put it on the floor, and go under the couch as fast as possible. I don't know why exactly, but somehow that sense of urgency is important for me to get any kind of heat out of it. Yeah. Yes, ma'am.
Did you land on the form? Did it kind of come to you in that first 3 months, or did it get there after several drafts when you realized all this stuff would have fit in?
Yeah, I've been trying to answer that question for the last couple of weeks, and I don't know if other writers feel this way, but I could tell that story 4 different ways and they'd all be true. It was almost like co-arising things, but I had written a graveyard book many years ago that didn't have any forward momentum, but it was in the early days of chat lines, and I loved the way they looked on the page, where somebody would interrupt you and the answer would come a page later, and so that was in my mind. And then I had a former student who said, if you ever wrote a novel, I think it would be a series of linked monologues. And you know, if you're writers, sometimes that just lit my mind up. It made me happy to hear that. I thought, oh yeah, that would be fun. And then Deborah Treisman at the New Yorker, I kind of said, oh, I've been writing this Lincoln play. I tried it as a play for many years, and it's so terrible. And she just goes, why don't you write it in prose? And I admire her so much that her saying that just gave me permission somehow. So the only thing that happened was, for a long time, the ghost attributions were at the top of their speeches, which makes sense, like a play. And then the historical ones were, as they're supposed to be, at the bottom. And you know, for me, a lot of the writing thing is, it's microsensitivity to your little petty opinions. And that just offended me on the page. I didn't like it. It seemed clunky. It also signaled too clearly ghost and not ghost. So one day I just thought, I'm going to move all the attributions to the bottom, just because I like it. And you know, I teach at Syracuse, and one of the things I try to say is, in writing, that those small preferences are really all you've got. And the difference between writer A and writer B is the flavor of those preferences and how in tune the writer is with those, whether it's line-to-line stuff or big structural stuff. So the form kind of evolved, I guess, is what. And then at one point, I'm like, this is confusing shit, you know, stuff to you know, because you get into those attribution, and you don't get to find out who's speaking till the end. And then I thought, well, in a way, that's kind of cool because they're dead, you know. So if a meteor hits us right now, and death is just like we thought it would be, that would be kind of weird, you know. Oh, St. Peter, you know. So I thought part of that was kind of cool, you know, to confuse it in that way. Yeah. Thank you. Yes, sir.
You mentioned in your interview with David Sedaris, kind of what you said earlier tonight about when you're writing a story and you get stuck, you just dig in and figure out how to fix it. Does that mean you don't throw anything away?
When I was younger, I threw a lot away, and now I don't. Yeah, I feel like if I just keep digging at it, whatever's blocking the story can actually become part of it in a certain way. So, and so far, that's kind of, I had one story that was in the New Yorker last year, and it was rejected by them 3 times for good reason. And so I just kept coming back to it. Kind of like I said, like, what's wrong with you, story? And the story will say, it'll actually tell you. And then there's a way you can put in. I had a story called Sea Oak many years ago, and there was a part where there was an old woman who was very passive, working class woman, and at one point she was killed in her house, and that was kind of a, you know, good stuff. And then not for her so much, but for me. And then then there was a funeral scene that I really liked, and it was kind of all right. And then she's dead, and she's the most interesting thing in the story, and I locked up for about 4 years. I just kept trying different, you know, kind of cheesy things. And one day I was just in the shower or something. I'm like, why can't you finish that story? You're such an idiot, you know? And I said, you know that she has to come back. And this little voice said, from the dead. And I'm like, you know, so it literally was, but that wouldn't have happened, unless, I think, for me, unless I'd had that 3 or 4 years of pushing. But that was exactly what was wrong with the story, is that she had to come back as a character. So just by that little verbal slip, suddenly she's, you know, back in it. So, yes. Sure. So the question was about how Tibetan Buddhism figures in. I've been kind of an amateur, not very good practitioner for about 15 years. And so really, for me, the biggest thing was this Buddhist notion, one, that your death and your life are related. The way you think right now is gonna not be unrelated to how you are after. And then also this idea that I mentioned earlier, that well, the second idea, your mind, they say, is like a crazy wild horse. And when it's in this body, the body damps it down. So as crazy as we are and neurotic as we are, you ain't seen nothing yet. Because when you die, they say it's like your mind is a horse that's been tied to a tree. When you die, the rope gets cut, and your mind gets supersized. So all your neuroses and all your fears and all your happiness and all your habits get really large. And they say even if you are in that state and you imagine a place, you go there. You're kind of almost, I don't know about omniscient, but your mind's very powerful. So that's scary, actually, because if you're me, it's scary, because I know it. Or if you like, and they also say that your whatever religious system you practice or mythological symbolic system will show up. So if you're a Christian, you'll see Jesus and Satan, and if you're a Buddhist, you'll see Buddhist deities, and if you watch a lot of pro wrestling, So I mean, I don't know. I'm not at all a scholar, but it's intriguing to me that whether you believe in the afterlife or not, it leads to the same result right now, which is to try to kind of get in touch with how your mind actually works and all that kind of stuff. Yeah. Could we take in the back, sir?
Yeah, I was actually listening to the story. I was remembering this weird anecdote about Nixon, where like when Nixon was really anxious, he would go walk on the mall to the Lincoln Memorial and like wound up talking to like protesters in like the middle of the night. And it's this weirdly humanizing story about him. And I was just curious about the project of humanizing powerful political figures today, but in general, what you thought about.
Yeah. Well, here's what I really think. So this tour started about 8 days ago, and everywhere we go, if we can get on the politics, the room lights up. Everybody wants to talk about it. And a lot of young artists are saying some version of, I can't work. This is not the time for it. I feel like it's not time for it. That's one question. To me, I think, okay, having written this book for 4 years, I had this beautiful experience, as anybody who writes or reads knows, which is that on literature, your mind lights up 380%. A comma can put you in tears. The right semicolon or a string of adjectives can kill you. So my thing is, our thing is, the brain on literature is maybe the best form of the human mind, except maybe the brain on love, but they're not that different. So there you are. You're in that state. What are you like? You're more generous. You're more curious. You're more comfortable with ambiguity. You're more inclined to look twice at a person to see if you've made a snap judgment. All those beautiful things. Well, so I finished this book, and I got a call from the New Yorker. Do you want to go cover the Trump rallies? I'm like, no. Yeah. I'm a novelist, and I don't have, And my wife said, yeah, you do. You're going. So I went, and instantly, then you have to be a journalist. So I'm on social media, and I'm watching CNN until I'm about to throw up, and all the things that we've all been doing. Okay, what happened? My mind shrunk. I got a little meaner. I got more combative. I wanted quick relief when some idiot would email me with his stupid right-wing beliefs. I shrunk. Now, I think that's appropriate, but it was weird to notice. So my thing is, we, in this moment, need to double down on art. Yeah, because how do we get here? We got here by allowing what we do to get marginalized. I've done it my whole life. I always wanted to be a writer, but it was always like, what do you do? I'm a writer. What is it? I'm a writer. That slight notion, like, that writers are oddball, extraneous freaks with berets, that kind of thinking. And I've indulged in that, and now we see what happens. You take the highest way that the mind can work, and you marginalize it, and vaguely mock it, and you don't compensate it. What happens? Oh, surprise, the culture's language gets stupid. Wow, how could that have happened, So I think double down on art. The other question people have all the time is, and this is the beautiful progressive question, should we be empathetic and loving and kind, or fierce and firm. I'm like, yeah, you should, you know. The idea that empathy, we have this, I have always had the idea that empathy has a bit of a weakness in it, like somebody drives a spike through your head and you're like, oh, thank you for the coat rack. I'll really, you know. But in Tibetan thing, compassion isn't wimpy. Compassion is, I don't want anyone to suffer. So if this guy over here is voting in a way that causes this immigrant family to feel like shit and suffer, you have compassion for them, but you also you don't want him to suffer either. So by any means necessary, you're going to try to turn him in a certain way. So I think it's a really lively time, but I feel like those of us who might be artists or progressives, one thing we have to do is say, you know, we're valid, we're citizens, you know, we're allowed, and we actually have a superpower that people who aren't in the arts don't have, and we should be proud of it and should put it forward. Can I close with one? Can I read you a poem? Yeah. And this is a loose definition of a poem. But when I find that when I get really stressed out, I resort to Seussian doggerel for some reason. So this is called Trompe l'oeil. A fragile egomaniac has taken up the reins, obsessed with size, defensive, and unmoved by others' pains. He seems to think that saying A, while B is clearly true, will cause the truth of B to wane and make A true to you. He stomps his foot, and with his hand he does that little chopper, then calls all things amazing as he tells another whopper. What is it that he wants so much? What wound must he assuage with all these lies and posturing and all that pent-up rage? When all is said and done, it seems the thing he wants is more, enough to finally satisfy some raging inner war. Everything's unfair to him, so sad, so overrated. Whatever gifts the world can give, insulting and belated. If some of you who voted for this vain and flailing man are noting now some meanness in his attitude and plan, it's fine, it's great, we welcome you. Please come on back and aid us in switching off the Kellyannes who nightly serenade us. With tricky sliding caveats and puzzling odd denials, with scary twisted Orwell riffs and sunny prom queen smiles. In other times and places, this dopey gong has sounded, that claimed that truth's negotiable and that we're all surrounded by enemies, by horror and by hate, by refugees who want us dead and liberals sleeping late. But what if, in the end, my friends, what seems most true is true? The president is like himself and not like me and you. A famous guy for all these years, an ego in a bubble, who learned that great attention could be got by causing trouble. And craving said attention, scuttled out in his pursuit, the working man's defender in a fine Brioni suit. Speak out, rise up, correct and shout, be stubborn and satirical, resist, rebuff, demand the truth, be positive and lyrical. Your country needs you now for sure. Your country needs your power. It needs you like a fragile thing in some uncertain hour. For goodness, peace, and decency were never heaven sent, and each of us must now become our own alt president. Thank you so much.